So we are going to do a little presentation on moral hazard. I'm not going to talk about the S&L crisis. We'll just do that in class. Moral hazard defined is the first part, and in some sense, the naming is a little bit unfortunate. The bulk of this presentation is to give you a sense of various examples that you should be familiar with. Moral hazard is omnipresent, and you should know it when you don't see it. So let's talk about moral hazard defined first. It's implicit in this idea for speeding ticket insurance, which does not exist. This is a joke. Moral hazard means hidden action. It means that behavior affects outcomes. In a risk situation, behavior affects the probabilities. In a production system setup, behavior affects output. Behavior is controlled by the individual, but the individual isn't under constant surveillance, so nobody actually knows what the behavior is other than the individual. That's the essence of moral hazard. Again, there is no such thing as speeding ticket insurance. Some people who like to drive fast wish there was, but I don't think this exists. We will be talking about principal-agent problems, and this picture of being two-faced, I think, is a perfect way of considering principal-agent problems. The agent represents one thing when in contact with the principal and does something quite different when away from the principal, presumably working on the principal's behalf. Some examples of principal agents are when you hire a lawyer to pursue a lawsuit on your behalf, when you hire a real estate agent to help you either buy or sell a property. There's elements of principal agent in the employment relationship between a supervisor and the employee, and as we'll see in a minute, there's elements of principal agent problems in the classroom as well. The prisoner's dilemma is interesting from a principal agent point of view because it shows that it can involve both players acting as agents and both players acting as principals at the same time. This is the original vision of the prisoner's dilemma, where you either confess to the crime or you betrayed your partner in the crime and got the partner punished, but you got off. So being silent means you don't confess. Betray means you do confess. Otherwise, this has the standard prisoner's dilemma structure. You can think of prisoner's dilemma as being two-sided principal-agent. So the expression moral hazard comes from insurance, and I believe Kenneth Arrow came up with the expression originally. The picture on the left is supposed to be the opposite of self-protection. Here is a distracted driver who is talking on the phone, putting lipstick on, presumably while driving. That is not taking self-protection. Driving cautiously is taking self-protection. Driving without paying attention increases the probability of an accident. The self-insurance on the right is that the size of your vehicle and what you do to protect your vehicle can affect the size of the loss when you actually have an accident. In class, I'll talk a little bit about soccer moms and the type of cars that soccer moms drive. There's a reason for that, and it refers to this issue of self-insurance, reducing the size of loss when loss occurs. There's moral hazard in medicine, which exists primarily because of medical malpractice, and so self-insurance against medical malpractice happens by ordering rather expensive procedures to show that there wasn't negligence, and sometimes those procedures would be deemed unnecessary, but It's a judgment call whether a procedure is necessary or not, and in the cases where bad outcomes occur, people will make inference about whether good prudent medicine was practiced ahead of time. The truth of the matter is sometimes good prudent medicine still leads to bad outcomes, and moral malpractice is accused sometimes when the doctor did everything the doctor should have done. A patient is still upset because the outcomes were bad, and you can understand that. So doctors do self-insure, and ordering extra procedures is a way of doing that. As I mentioned, there is moral hazard in the classroom, and it's on both sides. If teachers have to be evaluated by student performance on standardized tests, then teachers will have a tendency to teach to the test, which is a kind of cheating. So students don't get a broad education. All they get is preparation for the exam. And this is a common criticism of current education in America, particularly since the legislation No Child Left Behind. On the right is the proverbial student excuse: the dog ate my homework. So here's the actual visual of the dog eating my homework. I think this one was staged. I don't think dogs go after homework very much, but if the homework isn't done, the student will come up with an excuse. That's a moral hazard as well. Let's talk about causes for moral hazard. One of them is imperfect monitoring. So as I said at the beginning, the principal cannot see what the agent is doing all the time, or the whoever is taking the hidden action, that behavior often doesn't get observed perfectly. In this case, one of the reasons why the monitoring was imperfect is that the monitor was the client, and the monitor was getting paid, if you will, to look the other way. So getting paid to look the other way makes the monitoring less than perfect when it could have been better. Here's a case of this guy in this picture was a district attorney. He was guilty of some serious infraction, but the cops who were testifying for him had been fixing traffic tickets, so he gets off because the cops ultimately decided that they were going to be embarrassed if they testified against this guy. So even though this guy was guilty, he didn't get punished. So another reason for moral hazard is if you think you can get away with it, you'll take the devious action.